And welcome to episode 42 of Making It in Asheville. We normally start with a soundbite. This one is bigger than a bite. It's probably a full-blown meal, so we wanted to say hello before you listen to effectively 5 minutes or so of our guest, Gareth. We think it's a really meaningful soundbite. It's going to create a ton of context for the intro and for the episode generally, but just leading with it would have been a little strange. So please enjoy this sound meal, more than a sound bite, from our guest, Gareth Higgins. See you in a couple minutes.
I have an architect friend in Scotland who says the purpose of architecture is to help us live better. And you've seen bad architecture on that definition, and you've seen great architecture. Does it help us live better? I think that's the purpose of all art. All storytelling, actually, to help us live better. And that doesn't mean it can't deal with difficult subjects. In fact, it must deal with difficult subjects if it's going to help us live better. It just needs to be honest about those difficult subjects. So for me, because movies are the art form that has come to mean the most to me, and because often these days we don't get the chance to truly drink deeply at the well of a movie, even if we go to see it in the first place, you got to, go through. It's a busier experience. It's a noisier experience. The lights tend to come on before the credits are over. You don't get to breathe it in. And then there's no sort of interpretive mechanism to help us really make sense of what we just saw. Ask our questions, feel connected to other people who felt the same way. So we've done this festival. This is the 5th time we've done it, 2nd time in Asheville. And we do 2 or 3 things at it. One, we show beautiful films in a beautiful environment. Diana Wortham Theatre and the Fine Arts Theatre, both downtown. And we give those films the opportunity to breathe. So we keep the lights off until the end credits have finished, and we invite people to stay quiet until they're over. The second thing we do is we pair the films with conversations and activities that will deepen the meaning of the film. So we do stuff that's more than just a typical question and answer session. It's more about what's going on in you and how would you like to change as a result of seeing this film. We have a lot of fun with it as well. And the third thing is we invite people to connect with each other. Whether you've come as a group or you want to meet other people who are there, there's meal times and opportunities for people to hang out and get to know other people who feel the same way about some things, and maybe some new friendships can begin. And the day before the festival, we have a workshop called Rewriting Your Life, which is a deeper dive on many of the things we've talked about this afternoon, to think about what's the story you're telling? Is it true and is it helpful? If it's not, how can we help find a truer version and a more helpful version? One of the things we're really committed to is if you're one of the privileged people like me who has the money to attend an event like this, we invite you to pay to register to come to the event. We even invite you to pay more than the registration fee if you can. And if you are in financial need and can't afford the registration fee, you can come as well with no questions asked and no embarrassment. All you need to do is email us and tell us what you can afford. Because I think we're past the point of thinking that a beautiful experience of community should have a price tag on it that only those who can afford it can get in. We find, I do this with my own books. When I'm speaking at an event and I have books for sale, I'll let people know what the cover price is and tell them it'd be really great if you can pay that. And if you can't afford that, we take less than that. And if you can't afford that, you can have a book for free. And if you can afford more than the cover price to help me share this book with other people, I invite you to pay more. And I will say, in 6 years of doing that, people are always generous. People are always contributing more to help us give it away or to sell it for less. And there's lovely experiences where people say, look, I can't afford $16.99, but I might be able to afford 14 or 8 or nothing. It builds relationship and community. Generosity feeds on generosity. I have experienced so much generosity at the hands of this culture here in the US. This culture has helped me waken up to my own gifts in ways that Irish culture has a different way of doing things. Now, there are gifts in Irish culture too, but American generosity, American belief that we can do good things with our lives that help other people, that's beautiful, and it's a rare gift. And when people put that generosity out into the world, it's not like people say this like it's a woo-woo mystical thing, and maybe there is a woo-woo mystical part to it. I just think it's a practical reality. When someone does something generous and you see them doing that, it's an evolutionary reality that you're going to imitate what they do. So register for Movies and Meaning at moviesandmeaning.com if you can, and if you're in financial need, just contact us through the website. We'd much rather have you there and you not pay us or pay us less than have you miss this experience.
Welcome to the Making It in Asheville podcast, a podcast where you get to hear the stories behind some of your favorite artists and businesses in town. Each episode, we interview a local Ashevillean to uncover how they're making it in Asheville and provide you with actionable insights from each conversation.
And we're your hosts. That was Sarah. I am Tony. We are a husband and wife team that moved to Asheville in May of 2019. We did not have a fully drawn out plan as to what we were going to do. So we said, let's start a podcast and interview people who are making it. It was the single goal, like to figure out how others were doing it. And this podcast has been its result.
This podcast is powered by our very own marketing business called Making It Creative. We help passionate business owners develop meaningful storytelling and marketing strategies to grow and more effectively convert their audience into customers. You can visit makingitcreative.com to learn more.
Perfect. And thank you for being here today. I to say I'm excited about this episode is I cannot wait to hear what people have to say. This is a slight deviation from what I would say a standard episode has looked or felt like from us. It is not, business story. It's more life focused, if that makes sense. But one of the ways that we like to talk about making it creative, our marketing business, is through the lens of telling better stories to convert customers. In this episode, we talk about telling better stories to create better communities, to live more fully, to engage with your neighbor more powerfully. And I'm going to stretch and say this might be the most meaningful conversation we've had in a very long time. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, absolutely. Gareth gives some really important lessons on how to be a better human, which we've kind of said is also how you can be a better entrepreneur, but it really is a lot more of a bigger picture. Some of the key lessons that I really love from this conversation was how Gareth talks about examining your own life, how you can tell better stories about yourself. So what narratives are you telling yourself today that maybe aren't helpful? How can they be more helpful? We talk a lot about loneliness, how to overcome that feeling. And the part that is probably most in line with what we're trying to do is how to build a better community right here in Asheville, as well as in the world. So Gareth is just a lovely human being, and he's full of so many incredible stories and advice for, again, being a better human being.
Yeah, and the way that I would kind of describe it is that this is someone who has done the work. And I mean that both literally because we talk about Byron Katie in the episode and her process is considered the work, but someone who's spent a lot of time in it empathetically. So he's able to approach some very deep, meaningful conversation and very deep, meaningful topics with a nuance and delicacy that I am very far from, though I aspire to have one day. And just to kind of step back quickly, Gareth Higgins, identifies as a storyteller. He's a writer, he's a public speaker, and he is the founder of this, which you heard slightly about, this event in Asheville called Movies and Meaning. It's a festival. On top of that, he is the editor of a magazine called The Porch, which you'll hear about in this episode as well. And leads retreats in the U.S. and in Ireland. The underlying kind of connector through all of those projects, to me, my words are this kind of nonviolence, peacemaking, relationship, and community building thread kind of connects all of those. And that's in part because he was, born in Northern Ireland during a very difficult and very trying time for that country, for those people. And so it was honestly a privilege to get to sit down and hear his story, hear his takes on what it means to tell powerful and meaningful stories. And it's a conversation that we are so proud to be able to share with you, listener. So is there anything we want to add before we hop into it?
No, I mean, he's Irish, if you can't guess. He has a lovely Irish accent.
Oh, my goodness.
But no, let's dive in.
Perfect. So episode 42 with Gareth Higgins, the creator, founder of the Movies and Meaning Festival right here in Asheville. We're live on the internet. Come direct. But yeah, so where are we in Asheville, and who are you, sir?
So we're on the edge of East Asheville, moving towards Swannanoa, and my name's Gareth Higgins, and we're up a hill.
Oh my goodness! And
in
I
the
just
background,
looked
you might
out
hear
the window for the first time. I've been so
Yeah.
dialed in.
There's a lot of trees, and there's someone digging a hole. You may be able to hear the thrum of the digger as some lovely people are building a house next to us.
I'm jealous of them. This is a beautiful piece of country that we have not been to. We really haven't spent much time in East Asheville yet. And so driving out here, I was like, Sarah, we're going to have to do like a little Sunday drive with no end goal other than to see what's going on. This is really beautiful.
Yeah, we love living here. It's only 15 minutes from downtown, but sometimes you feel like you're 100 miles away.
That's exactly, wow, yes. We feel the same way. We said that as we pulled in. I was like, I would not ever, if we had just started 5 minutes before arriving here, I would assume that we were 45 minutes to an hour from Asheville, easy. It's beautiful. So what this is considered just East Asheville?
It's, East Asheville / Swannanoa.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for having us in a room full of books. This is your office.
Yeah.
And so based on the internet and based on our intro, our audience already knows that there's a lot of work being done. But how do you describe the work that you're up to today?
It's a good question. I think I'm a storyteller, and sometimes that can sound a bit pretentious, but I think all humans are storytellers. We're making meaning out of our lives all the time by telling ourselves a story about it that may or may not be true and may or may not be helpful. But I come from an ethnic tradition of storytelling. I am Irish, and I mean that literally. I was born in Ireland. I lived there for the first 3.5 decades or so of my life. So I tell stories, and the way I do that is I write, and I lead festivals, and I lead retreats. And all of the writing and the festivals and the retreats are about trying to get conscious about better stories about connection, about creativity, and the common good, rather than stories about separation and scapegoating and selfishness. And that might sound like a cliche, but I actually think those are good ways of describing the difference between some of the stories that dominate in our society and some of the stories that we all know deep in our gut are more true and better for us. The stories that bring us together, the stories that validate your personal experience. Even if you're a quiet person or someone who's not upfront, maybe wouldn't identify as special, the spotlight has never shone on you. I truly believe that your place in the community is as valuable as anybody else's. Your gift is really important, and we can't function without everyone being invited to the table to do what they came here to do.
Wow.
I love that, and I think that in many ways resonates with the many interviews that we've done and will continue to do. I'm wondering, do you remember a moment maybe as a child or earlier on in your life where you were like, yeah, like I love telling stories, or maybe there was a story that you heard and it resonated with you that helped you take on that identity as a storyteller?
Well, my mum is a theater teacher. And so I was raised around amateur theater, watching it, and let's call it important theater, reading it. Shakespeare, the obvious starting point there for me, but later the Irish playwright Sean O'Casey, Samuel Beckett, and being introduced to live theater by my mother when I was really young gave way pretty quickly to going to the movies all the time, because frankly going to the movies is cheaper than going to live theater, especially when you're 9 years old. So do I remember a story that I heard that told me I was a storyteller? What's coming to mind is I do remember being so moved by Dead Poets Society, by the notion of Robin Williams' character, John Keating, the teacher, as an inspirational figure who wanted his students to know the most important thing they could do would be to make their lives extraordinary. Now, the film itself doesn't connect the concept of extraordinary with a whole lot. And, you could live an extraordinary life and do really terrible things that are out of the ordinary. I got lucky because I was around people as a teenager particularly, and then later, who were committed to trying to resolve the conflict in Northern Ireland that had been going on in some respects for centuries, but particularly since the late 1960s, where two different competing visions of how the society should be run and what was justice were fighting against each other, and people were being killed. And I fell in among peacemakers. I was very fortunate that some people took me under their wing and mentored me. So I suppose this vision that I got from movies that were always really exciting, they always had this bigger vision of the world. It then got married to, what are you doing for the benefit of the common good in your society? And that's not to say I've always done that or I've ever even fully done it. I was never taught that what you should do with life is get as much as you can for yourself and keep it. I just never, that was never part of my upbringing. My parents never taught me that. My parents taught me care for your neighbor. And my society had lots of opportunities to do that because it was such a broken society. And movies were this way for me to dream my way into an escape from what was difficult about growing up there. I also consider myself very, very lucky that no teacher of mine ever thought I would be good at rugby, because then they never tried to get me to play rugby. And so I had more time to go to the movies, which is what was meant to be. Yeah. It was what was meant to be. I think if I had been, I have the body of a rugby player. I'm kind of built to play rugby. And I think if someone had mentored me to play rugby, I would have missed out on a lot of great cinema.
Oh, man.
My mind goes to that Italian movie,
Paradiso.
Paradiso. Yeah, the young boy, right? Going in the theater and being enamored by...
Yeah, it's a very special film. And if you come to the event we're running toward the end of this month, you may or may not see the director's cut of that film.
Stop.
You may or may not. I can neither confirm nor deny.
Whoa. Okay, that's
so there's something really special about that film in that a lot of people are familiar with it. It came out in 1988. It's a film about a little boy growing up in an Italian village and being taken under the wing of the crotchety old projectionist who at first tells him, "Get out of my projector booth," and then eventually kind of loves him and teaches him.
Classic.
It's about the power of stories and movies and like love in a small town and what happens to you when you leave your small town because you can't wait to get out, and then you get to the big city and realize I can't wait to be back. And holding those two things constant. A lot of people have seen that movie. There's a really special thing in that the cut that most people have seen is about 50 minutes shorter than the director's cut. Director's cuts of movies are often, 5-10 minutes longer or a little tweak here or there. The director's cut of Cinema Paradiso has a completely extra subplot within the story, and we're planning to screen it soon. So
Can I? Wow. Okay. So it's literally, we have like 3 DVDs in our apartment and like a 20-something
They're
inch
all
screen,
Italian.
and they're
Oh, are
only
they all
they're only
Italian?
Italian
Right,
movies.
right. What
What
have you got?
So we have Cinema Paradiso, and then we have like a Piff movie.
La mafia uccide solo durante
Wow.
l'estate.
So
Mafia kills only in the summer.
only in the summer.
Yeah.
And so
You know when not to go to Sicily then.
exactly. So it's Naples based, and he is this incredible. So he meant nothing to me. Sarah moved to New York. We had done a bunch of like restaurant dates, and then she said like, "Hey, there's this Italian movie that's playing. I just heard about it. Would you be interested in going?" And I was like, "Obviously, that sounds awesome. Sure, whatever." And so it turns out that it's at Lincoln Center, and it's the U.S. premiere of this guy Piff, who is like a Woody Allen type actor, director, writer of these Italian comedy films that are also dramas.
Yes.
The first was this, the Mafia Only Kills in the Summer. This one is called In War for Love. And both were absolutely fantastic. I mean, we have those, but he also like showed up at the end of the movie, and they did an interview.
Did a Q&A, lovely.
And so we're like, talk about underselling the event. She's like, there's this Italian movie that's playing.
Well, but nobody knows him. I mean, people
Yeah.
know him in New York a little bit, but nobody really knows him here, let alone in Italy. Like they don't really know him that well.
Well,
either.
that's a
These
nice
movies are
date.
fantastic.
Yeah,
I think
that's a
that
nice date.
if they're not on your radar, I think you'd appreciate
All
them
right,
for the
thank you.
for the power of stories. It's the idea. It's not unlike Cinema Paradiso, where it's the story that you tell in the Mafia Only Kills in the Summer movie. It's the stories that a father tells to a son to have him not be worried about this idea of the mafia. It's wintertime, so like, don't worry, the mafia only kills in the summer. And then it's all of these lies and a adult man trying to make sense of them as he has a son, and trying to like honor the stories he was told and the truths and all of these. I think it might hit a special place. A fantastic film. Okay, so the movie Cinema Paradiso, I've always felt that there wasn't a lot told about the present day character. Is perhaps if you've seen
that's
what's missed.
That's what's in the director's cut.
Okay, great. We'll link to the festival where this may or may not be playing at the end of the month.
Oh my goodness, where you may or may not see us
Right.
crying watching that score. The score
Oh,
too.
Yeah.
Music has such an important role in film for me. Oh my goodness. Okay. Sorry to
We
make
could
this
have a whole
about
podcast
it's
episode about that.
Cinema Paradiso.
But so we uncovered a little bit, of the story, how you came to be a storyteller, perhaps. But what about how did you get to Asheville?
Well,
places?
my husband got a job here, and it was very serendipitous, and we've loved living here for the last 8 years or so. He's from this neck of the woods anyway, and so that's how I got here.
And so then, if it was 8 years ago, what have you been up to for these 8 years? Is it the same? Like it seems like there's a lot of hats being worn based on your website and the internet at large. But like, what kind of hats for the last 8 years have you been wearing?
Well, one of my best friends lives in New Zealand, and his answer to that question, what do you do, is sometimes I take my dog for a walk on the beach, and the rest of the time is about figuring out who I am. And so it's not so much a matter of hats. I have one hat that has, I don't know, different tassels on the on the hat. So what I give my time to is I edit a magazine that we co-founded that's about telling these kinds of stories. We do a monthly storytelling night in Asheville called 531. We have 5 stories and 3 songs from a local musician, 1 community. We do that at the block off Biltmore on the second Monday of every month. And we do these festivals, one of them in Asheville, the Movies and Meaning Festival, another one I do in Texas, and then the retreats that we run. Some of them are here around the country also, and in Ireland. And the point is all about, can we gather people, ask each other, what's the story you're telling yourself, And then just work with that.
Yeah.
Is it true? Is there a truer version of that story? If it's true, is it the most helpful way to tell the story? And you're looking animated.
I am
as
so
I say
animated.
This, so
you're triggering some work that I've done on myself. One is Byron Katie. Does
sure,
she mean anything to you?
I'm very familiar with.
So
Byron
like
Katie's work.
that idea, is it true?
Yeah.
Revolutionary for me.
Yeah,
is
it
true?
often isn't.
It's often almost never. It's never true.
Yeah, maybe one of the deepest beliefs I carry about myself isn't true. And I mean, what Byron Katie is doing is kind of deep psychological, spiritual work that I think is very valuable. And anybody listening who doesn't know about her, I encourage you to go to thework.com and look at her videos of being in dialogue with people. This is about liberating ourselves from beliefs that harm us. Mm-hmm. The question I'm asking about, is it true? It's slightly different. And that's to do with, let me give you an example. Mm-hmm. So there's pretty good evidence that currently about 700 million people on the planet are living in extreme poverty. And if I just tell you that statement, just make that statement as it stands, 700 million people on the planet living in extreme poverty, that's an astonishing figure. I can't even begin to conceive of what 700 million people looks like. It's more than twice the population of the United States. I've met some people living in mild poverty, and that's hard enough. And I have never lived in any form of poverty. It's never been my experience. And if all I tell you is that there's 700 million people living in extreme poverty, you might be likely to respond with, the enormity of the task is just so great, I don't even know where to begin. And in the worst scenarios, you might be, let's call it, browbeaten by the heaviness of that into despair or apathy. There's nothing we can do. But if I extend the story and tell you that 200 years ago, 90% of the global population was living in extreme poverty, and 700 million is about 10% of the current global population, then you start to see over 2 centuries, we've gone from 90% to 10%. And so it's a different story now. You could begin by saying there's been nearly a 90% reduction in extreme poverty worldwide in the last 2 centuries. However, if I started by telling you that, to tell you the good news story of this enormous reduction, you run the risk of a different problem, which is apathy of a different kind, passivity of a different kind. Wow, things are so amazing. They're just going to keep getting better. There's no need for us to do anything. Which the Harvard psychologist Steven Pinker quotes somebody saying, that's like walking into a laundry room if you didn't know how to do laundry. And you saw that there was a pile of laundry on the floor that needs to be done. And then you went away and came back 2 hours later and discovered the laundry was now clean and had been nicely folded on top of the washing machine. You would not say, oh my goodness, that laundry must have done itself. If you didn't know how to do laundry, what you might say is, oh, that's interesting. That laundry seems to have been done. I wonder how it got done. And then maybe you could find someone who knows how to do laundry and say, could you tell me how that laundry got done? And they could tell you. And then over time, you could get more complex into, I find sometimes when I do laundry this way, my legs itch afterwards. And someone explains to you that's because you're using a detergent that isn't hypoallergenic, and you figure out what an allergy is, and so on and so forth, and you go down that road. We would never, ever look at laundry that had been done and say, this laundry has magically done itself. Nor should we say, extreme poverty has magically reduced by nearly 90% in 200 years. We have history books and economists and activists who we can read and learn from about why that happened, and then could ask, are there things we could learn from that and do some similar things now? So you hold both parts of the story at the same time, one being amazing things have happened, another being terrible things are still happening, the next being could we do some of the same things that were done over the past 2 centuries that could help the people who are living in these difficult circumstances now? And if I am not one of the 700 million people living in extreme poverty, and if I'm listening to this podcast, I'm almost certainly not living in extreme poverty because I have access to the equipment to listen to a podcast. The only question that's ethical, the most important one that's relevant, is what am I going to do with the resources I have to help make this situation better for other people who don't have those resources? And that's what I mean by asking the question, is it true? So yeah, it's true that there's 700 million people living in extreme poverty. Is that the most helpful way to tell the story? No. You got to provide the context. Flip it. Is it true that 200 years ago, 90% of the global population was living in extreme poverty? It seems to be, and there's been this massive reduction. Is that the most helpful way to tell the story? No, because that will breed inaction. So that's kind of a complicated way of explaining this. I think it does make sense. I think all of us are holding on to a story that either isn't true at all or is true, but it's only one small moment of the story, and it keeps us stuck. I mean, that's how trauma works.
The playback loop.
Something that happened to me when I was 8. I mean, there is something that happened to me when I was 10 years old that terrified me for about 20 years thereafter. And through good community support and trauma therapy, I was able to get to a point where I could tell the story differently. And a lot of the time, that's about helping people move from what you could call a victim consciousness, where all I am is the target of that terrible thing. And I can't see any way out, because what's happening to me is the 10-year-old inside me is stuck there and has never been treated with compassion or intelligence. You know, the knowledge that we have now about to help people assist people with trauma. But I think our whole culture is traumatized. I think our politics is traumatized. I think the way we talk about reality is traumatized. So hopefully, because of the gifts I've received from other people who've helped me along the way, asking this question about how can we tell the truest version of the story available to us in the most helpful way can help us take a step beyond being stuck.
Here's to that. Amen. Dang.
I'm wondering, on that same line of thought, so one of the things I've always struggled with is, okay, we have this personality, and I've taken, Enneagram tests and the Myers-Briggs test and all these personality tests that says this is, your natural state of being. And many of them can be very helpful because they also tell you, like, okay, if you're this, like, these are things that you can sort of recognize in yourself and how to overcome that. But how do you think about those types of personality tests that in some ways put people in boxes, perhaps, or could seem to be? And the narrative that you just said, which is it true? What's the most helpful story that you can tell about yourself?
Well, those things like the Enneagram, they're tools, and I suppose like any tool, like a hammer can be helpful if you've got some nails to knock into a wall, but it can also be harmful if you drop it on somebody's head, and sometimes you don't need a hammer. You need a different kind of tool to achieve the end you're looking for. So I would encourage people, if they're looking into things like any Enneagram and so on, find mature teachers. And there are some really mature teachers out there. In fact, I mean, this was not rehearsed, but one of them is coming to the Movies and Meaning Festival, Mickey Scott Bay Jones. So, using them as tools rather than having them use you, and recognizing, sure, the Enneagram says there's 9 types. There are 7 billion people on the planet. I might want to suggest that there are 9 types and there are also 7 billion types. And there's nothing wrong with you if you think you don't fully fit within one type or another. I think a far more important question to ask is this question about resources and power. What resources and power do you have in the world? Whether you believe you earned it or not. I don't care if you think you earned it or not. I care about what you're doing with it. And the flip side of the resources and the power that any one of us has is the lack, the challenge, the gap, the emptiness, the struggle. And the question we got to ask about that is, who are the safe people to ask for help? And safe doesn't mean antiseptic, right? Safe means someone who's not going to harm you in response to your request or shame you in response to your request. And this is really how human beings are supposed to, like, if human beings related to each other this way, we'd have a totally functional society, right? If the first time we met, you said to me, hi there, here's what I've got and here's what I need. And I could say, wow, I have some of the things you need. And I can also help you find someone else who has some of the things you need. And some of the things you've got, I need them too. This is what's going on in the back of all our minds all the time. Our culture has repressed it so much that it's buried underneath. Well, it's both our culture and evolution hasn't caught up with the necessity of interacting with each other peaceably. Our amygdala, the fear receptors in our brains, still think that there are saber-toothed tigers waiting around every corner to come and get us. And so, we're like biologically programmed to be what I call defensive-aggressive, like defensive aggression. Say again?
I would say the default energy is this person's trying to hurt me, and so I'm going to preempt with some sort of attack.
That's right. I got to protect myself. And I mean, there's deeper questions there, but let's get into defining what is the self that I'm trying to protect. There's deep spiritual wisdom across the world that suggests the stuff that's real about you can't be harmed under any circumstances anyway, even if they kill you. And that, as the oracle in the Matrix would say, that will really bake your noodle if you think about it long enough.
Yeah.
And then there is the question of how to get through a day. But I feel like one of the things we're trying to cope with in our current moment is the bombardment of information, propaganda, wisdom, and abuse that electronic media makes almost inevitable in our lives. You have to train your brain to discern the difference between information, propaganda, wisdom, and abuse. And social media doesn't make that easy. Now I'm not one of these people who's kind of anti-technology. It's back to being a tool. A hammer can be used to put some nails in a wall or drop on somebody's head. What are we doing with the tool? What is it? Is it leading to more life, more connection? Is it leading to more anxiety, less health? Does it help us care for our neighborhoods? We live on a street. There's 15 houses here, and a few years ago, we came to believe we really needed to get to know the neighbors who live on this street, because I was complaining all the time about how nobody knows their neighbors anymore, and realizing I don't know my neighbors either. And we took some steps toward getting to know our neighbors, and I'm happy to say we know the names of almost everybody who lives on this street, and we invite everybody over once a year for a cup of coffee. You don't have to be living in each other's houses in order to be good neighbors. And I want to encourage people, if you don't know any of your neighbors at all, try knocking on the doors of the 3 residences to your left and the 3 residences to your right, and have a plan in mind to invite those folk in for a cup of coffee. It does not have to be extravagant. Have a plan in mind, and do that cup of coffee at 10:30 on a Saturday morning. Don't make it dinner the first time. That's too much pressure.
I love that.
And you may discover when you have the cup of coffee that you don't want to have dinner together. They may discover they don't want to have dinner with you, but you at least know each other.
Yeah.
And it does begin to reduce the tension that exists in our society. And I don't just mean tension between red and blue politically. There's something about urban living that increases people's suspicion of each other, Now, I'm a sociologist by training. I don't want to lionize rural living either. It's not like rural life is paradise and urban living is hell. Every place has a shadow side. I mean, and you could say that the shadow side of rural living is there could be like fear of outsiders. Urban living, it's fear of everybody, right? But we all have, I think it's an innate need for connection with other humans. And I think we have an innate need for a sense of purpose and meaning that includes not just what we believe about the world and the pleasures we get from watching a movie or reading a book or hearing a politician that pushes our buttons in the right way. There's an innate need to give something to the world, some form of service. And to my mind, there is no pleasure comparable with the pleasure of doing something good for others for its own sake. Now, again, I am not Gandhi, right? I am not Mother Teresa. These are theories that I dabble in and I discover, wow, when we went and washed people's cars for the day, it was fun, it was beautiful, and it helped people.
Yeah, and I'm pro being of service for self-centered need, like for just the endorphins. I'm okay with you going to the soup kitchen because it makes you feel good.
Sure.
I'm good with that. Sure. Like I think that is absolutely admirable that you want to scratch that itch in that way. There's something I heard recently, and I wonder, because you're kind of moving towards it and then away and then back. The idea that, in not all cases, but in some cases, a sense of loneliness and depression is the ego's obsession with I. And a way to break out of a rut like that is to start being of service in any way possible. And it speaks to that higher purpose, that calling that you said, which is to do something that makes a difference to those around us.
Yeah, and I want to. There's a way to talk about this that can hurt people more,
right?
And that is, if you're deeply in a depressive funk, it can be really difficult to even imagine getting out of bed in the morning. And I've been there, and I've been there for extended periods in my life. And there's a step in between that and the getting out of bed and then going and connecting with people and being of service. But once you're able to take that step, and sometimes it requires, like in my case, one time, I'll tell you a story. I remember back in Belfast 20 years ago being so depressed, end of my rope depressed, on a Saturday night, and saying to one of my friends who was over for dinner, I just don't know what to do. And I didn't even know the word depression. I was so stuck in it. I didn't understand what was happening to me. And now I actually know that part of what was going on was a trauma experience. And my friend, whose name is Trevor, he said to me, okay, you don't know what to do. And he'd seen me go through this for months. And he's like, let's try an experiment. I'm going to tell you what you need to do. And your part of the bargain is you have to do it. And you have to say, yes, you're going to do it before you know what it is. Now, obviously, I would have had the agency to decline after he told me what it was. But I was in such a low point. I would have done anything healthy at the time. And he said, okay, it's about 6 o'clock on a Saturday night. He said, go and have a cold shower right now for 5 minutes. So, okay, I went and had a cold shower right now for 5 minutes. And then I, got dressed and came back out. What do I do next? He says, come to church with me tomorrow morning. And this was not about religion. It was about community. It was about getting out of the house, going to a place where there were other kind people doing kind things. And after church, I said to him, okay, what do I do now? And he said, go for a walk with me this afternoon. And that was about getting my body moving. And I hadn't been for a walk in a long time. Those are 3 things: cold shower, come to church, go for a walk, all done within 24 hours. And the depression lifted for 6 months. Wow. And, and I didn't know how to get treatment, and that's partly why it came back. I think what was happening was a little more poetic than that. I think what was happening was a friend of mine was truly showing me that they cared, and they were willing to risk embarrassing themselves by doing so. I mean, it's crazy. Tell me to go and have a cold shower for 5 minutes. It had an effect on my body, and now some of the things we know about somatic realities, and particularly the field of sensory motor psychotherapy, says, oh, there was actually something neuroscientific happening there. You wouldn't want to stay in the cold shower too long because it'll freeze you, and you don't want to have a scalding hot shower because it'll burn you. it woke me up. It knocked me out of my...
Pulls you back into your body.
Exactly. And I didn't know, I didn't have the language for that at the time.
Yeah.
I just felt cared for at the end of my rope.
Heavy.
And so I can't remember how we got on to that. Oh, it's more to do with like, you know, I don't know that I would have got out of that funk if it hadn't been for Trevor.
Right.
And so we all kind of need a Trevor around. And often my job is to be the Trevor. And your point was about, you know, being of service to other people does actually positively affect your own soul. I've been writing a book about fear, and in the chapter on the fear of being alone, I was trying to wrestle with what's the antidote to the fear of being alone. And I felt alone a lot in my younger years, always on the outside of things, always the last person chosen for the team. Although when I tell that story to groups, everybody else says they were always the last person chosen for the team, and it couldn't have been true for all of us. Or maybe just only people who were the last person chosen for the team come to my events. And that's great. They're all welcome. They were excluded for long enough.
Yeah.
And if you were the person that did the choosing, you're also welcome at our events too, and we'll forgive you. So I was on the outside, and I realized the antidote to the fear of being alone is to become your own best friend. If you think about the most popular people you know, the people who are popular not because they're sexy or famous, right? People who are popular for deeper reasons. They are the people who like themselves the most in a healthy way, not in an egocentric way, but people who are just deeply comfortable with themselves. Because one of the manifestations of that is someone who's deeply comfortable with themselves tends to be more interested in you, right? Because they don't need to be broadcasting their achievements. And they genuinely are interested. How are you doing? What's going on? There's got to be someone in your life who calls you up and remembers something that was happening to you months and months ago and checks in with you about that. Isn't that so lovely when that happens? Because you thought they'd forgotten. You had maybe even forgotten yourself. And the warmth of someone caring enough to remember about this thing that might have been big, might have been little, but was still real. That's more likely to come from someone who is so in touch with their own goodness and their own lack of need to be perfect. So if you're alone, start befriending the person you see in the mirror. And if you look in the mirror and you don't immediately see something that you think is worth loving, first of all, I don't buy it. I understand that you may feel that way.
Here.
But start with the part that you can love. I bet you can find something, just something, where some incident in your life where you didn't completely mess up, right? Start loving that person. And I have seen this happen. This weird miracle takes place. That as you start to like yourself, tell yourself that you like yourself, even if you don't like yourself, because to tell yourself you like yourself implies that you do think you're worth liking, even if you don't like yourself yet. Once you start doing that, people will mysteriously start showing up in your life and befriending you. And it's because you're a person they enjoy being around.
I love that, and I completely agree. I once was asked to speak at a high school senior graduation on the concept of like what advice, sage wisdom can I impart to these young adults on their way into college, and so I tried to unpack what I consider to be three of the primary things that they might be thinking of. One is, oh, Tupelo. Was that a leaf?
Nothing obvious. Sometimes it can be her reflection. Let's let her out here for a minute.
It's all right.
See what
The sun just changed drastically.
Fan on in here, is it gonna
I think we'll be okay. Let's see.
We need a bit of this, but
Yeah.
kind of stuffy.
Yeah.
Tupelo,
I think you should be fine.
what are you gonna do? Did you disagree with what was being said?
You can't talk to high school seniors.
Let's see how that goes.
Yeah, I think that's gonna be fine. And And one of the things I focused on was the idea of like finding that a romantic connection, right? People are thinking about that.
Yeah.
Hormones are blasting at 18 years old. And I said, if I could give you a single bit of advice, it's try and be someone that you yourself like. And I heard you saying the things that I was trying to find words for, which is be interested, have interests, do things because they give you life. And then if that situation arises, people want to talk to you or have an opportunity to talk to you, you can show a deep curiosity in a trade, a craft, a art form, film. And if people are on your level, they're going to either love that about you and not know anything about movies, but love that you love movies. And so it's just be someone. I think that's a beautiful point. And dang-a-lang, if we could all hear that as early as possible.
And it's a daily journey, you know?
It is.
Like it's not, it doesn't happen overnight. And it really is okay to go find a Trevor and say, I don't know what to do. But choose your Trevors wisely.
Yeah.
That's part of the issue is sometimes we ask the wrong people for advice. People who may not be ready to give you or may not have done the kind of journey that so choose someone who's obviously a bit further down the road than you are.
Yeah. And one of the points that came up earlier, and I'm always constantly trying to find like the parallel in perhaps business sense, but you mentioned how with neighbors, you don't invite them to dinner.
Not
right?
the first time.
Not the first time, right? And that was the same thing. Like I used to give that advice in dating as well. No, like it's not good that the first date is drinks, dinner, and like another thing because that's a huge commitment. No one knows what they're getting into. It could be terrible. Everyone's going to hate it. Start with the smallest possible ask and make it very explicit. We have a thing at 12, but we'd love you to come over at 10:30. So they know at the very most they're in for 90 minutes, but it can be shorter. Coffee doesn't take 90 minutes to drink.
And it's mutual pressure that you want to release.
Exactly.
There. And if it goes really well, you can say, well, we'll do this again.
Yeah.
You will do this again.
And I bring that up again because of the idea of the ask of a Trevor who might not be full-time Sherpa and spiritual leader, right? You don't say, hey, like I need you to be on the phone with me for 2 hours every night. I'm in this deep place. Like the ask is small and it's clear, and there are expectations that have been communicated explicitly, at least to start.
Yeah.
On the first date, on the first version of that.
Yeah.
Dang, we need Trevors.
All I can think about is you saying yes to do this podcast with us for more than 90 minutes was a really big yes, and a really big
yes.
ask.
Yeah, it was.
So thank you.
I really like talking.
Yeah, he's not
I'm sorry.
I mean, you are a writer.
I'd forgotten the two of you were in the room.
You are a writer, but you're a storyteller. I was like, this is wheelhouse stuff. This is going to be perfect. Thank you for all of that. And I oh my goodness, I hope if someone is listening and that spoke deeply to them, please reach out to us, reach out to Gareth if that's okay, via the links. But talk to people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a suggestion around this is really practical and that emerged in our lives a few years ago. I had this notion. Do we have time for me to say a few more things?
Yeah,
okay, good.
We have plenty of time.
Yeah.
So, people say what humans need to survive is food, water, air, and shelter, right?
Yeah, that hierarchy we're always talking about.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs, yeah. Cool. Food, water, air, and shelter. That makes sense to me. Now, shelter, whether you define it as 4 walls and a roof, or you live in a place where you might not have 4 walls, or you might not have a roof, it's usually talking about physical shelter from the elements. Mm-hmm. That's usually what that shelter means. I don't think that goes far enough. I think there are 3 other elements to shelter that we can actually work with to bring more into our lives. The first is, I do think all of us need a close circle of friends. I think that that's at least 3 people. Me, you, and someone else. I think once you get beyond about 8 people, it becomes unwieldy. You can be friends with as many people as you like, but to have a circle that's consistent, about 8 people is the maximum that you can really make that work with. Maybe some people can do it with 12, but between 3 and 8. And the reason for 3 instead of 2 is 2 people's a friendship, 3 is a circle. And I heard Warren Beatty say once that the reason why he likes to collaborate with at least 2 other people is that if it's a duo, one person will always dominate. It may not be the same person each time, but you don't have anyone there to help resolve the conflict. Whereas if you've got 3 of you, someone can always give perspective whenever 2 of you are fighting.
Yeah.
You know? So I think a circle of at least 3 people is one of the 3 elements of shelter. The second element is this thing about purpose and meaning, and that's finding out what it is you're here to do that serves the common good. Now, it's usually... You want to say something?
No, I have a question, and I'm sorry because I know that you were going into it, but that sounds super heavy. And if someone is really far from finding their purpose that serves that common good... Yeah. Please continue with the 3 things, but I would love to try and unpack.
Come back to how do we unheavy that?
What are version 1 of that? Sorry.
Sure. Okay. Well, we're all amateurs. Yes. We're all novices in this. So there's good news on that. So what I was going to say about purpose and meaning is it usually has something to do with your greatest wound in your life, because we're spending our lives, most of us are spending our lives just repeating the wound. Mm. We're either picking at the scab and not allowing it to become a scar. A dear friend of mine, Nadia Bolz-Weber, talks about, are you living from your wound or are you living from your scars? And they're 2 different. The wound is the idea that it hasn't actually healed yet. And that's what therapy and community and lovers and healers are for. You know, it's not what blogging is for. Do people still blog? It's not what social media is for. There's an invitation to publish your scar. I would discourage people from publishing their wounds. There's more work to be done before it's safe for them to do that. Otherwise, they run the risk of being re-wounded. And part of the good news about wounds, similar to the fear of being lonely or being alone, like, often, if you do enough work and you uncover a sense of purpose, it's usually got something to do with healing in the world the painful thing that was done to you. Yeah. You know, and again, there's 7 billion wounded people walking the planet, but there's really only a handful of wounds, right? And part of the beauty of that is we'll always be able to find other people who've suffered more than we have, or in a similar way. Yeah. And we'll be able to find people who've recovered more than we have, and can lay some breadcrumbs on the trail to help us find our way to integrating the wound. To go back to what I was saying, I think a lot of us are just picking at the scabs, or we are inverting it, and we may actually be doing to other people the thing that was done to us. You know, if we felt isolated and judged as children, we might be really good at isolating and judging other people. Of course, we have the possibility we might be the most empathetic, compassionate friend in the world because we understood what it was like to not be treated with compassion. It takes consciousness to do that. One of the things I loved about Tom Hanks playing Mr. Rogers recently was Mr. Rogers is easy to write off because he's nice. He's easy to ignore because he's nice. When you actually look at that man's life and see what he did, it was more than nice. He was brilliant, and he was radical, and he cared deeply about humane connection. And there's stuff, there's anti-racist stuff he was doing in the 60s that he was just modeling for people without trumpeting it. There's a moment in that film where it became very clear, sure, it does seem to me that Fred Rogers had some natural kindness abilities that were given to him, so he can't take any credit for them, right? We can't actually give him any prizes for just being naturally kind. And I don't have to feel bad if I'm less naturally kind than Mr. Rogers. I may actually deserve more credit because I have to work harder to be kind than he did. And I think he'd be the first to admit that. More importantly is there's a moment in the film where it's clear he is making a decision to be kind. You can see anger flash briefly across his face, but he chooses not to give in to the anger. He breathes, pauses, and he actually thanks the person speaking to him for making him think more deeply about his life. Whatever your wound is, I've not yet met anyone who doesn't have the possibility, with the right help, of turning their wound into the place that they serve the world and healing themselves by doing that. Now, there are many people who have suffered in monumentally grievous ways. And maybe what we need to do with those folk, first of all, is to just give them as much space and care and attention as they need, maybe for years. Maybe for years. There are some forms of suffering that are unimaginably great. And yet, the paradox is, some of the people I know in Northern Ireland who suffered the most were the pioneers of peace building and conflict resolution there. Now, I don't know how that works. There's some people who've just been, I'm not going to say destroyed, nearly destroyed by the pain they've experienced. And they just deserve a rest and care and attention until they're ready to do what comes next. But there does seem to be a paradox that some of the people who've suffered the most have also been the bravest in transforming that into a kind of a healing thing. And then the third thing, in addition to a close circle, a sense of purpose, the third thing is I really think we all need at least one or two mentors who are further down the road, who can speak into our lives, give us feedback, encourage us, affirm us, call us out when we're believing our own propaganda, be a shoulder to cry on, give us a swift, nonviolent kick to the ass when it's time for us to get moving again. Or maybe just a sofa to sleep on a night when we need to get away. Those three things, if you marry that last one in partnership with, I think all of us eventually need to be mentoring other people. It's a two-way relationship. I'm receiving mentoring from others and then I'm passing it on to other folks as well. Not the same as control, certainly not coercion, but relational sharing of experience. Now, maybe I've made it sound more heavy. If you want me to speak to how do you unheavy the purpose question, I'll speak to how to unheavy the purpose question.
Yeah, I think that would be impactful because one of the things we hear sometimes, and I think I give a lot of light to, whether or not it's actually that bright, is the idea that entrepreneurs, let's say, who are working to solve their life's work and they've found their passion, that concept just existing holds some people back from beginning work, which could become their life's work or their life's passion.
You got to know what your life's passion is before you take step number one.
How can you know what your unique really skill is for the greater good?
Yeah. You should ask other people who know you. That's one really important step. We have this thing that we call porch circles. Our magazine is called The Porch. The idea is a place where you can sit with wiser people who can advise you, but also just relax on a sunny day in a hammock. And the porch circles, which you can find on theporchmagazine.com under community circles, I think is the menu item. It's a suggestion that if you want to find this shelter, these three forms of shelter, pick two other people who you feel comfortable with. And don't start with dinner. Start with coffee. And when you meet, ask 4 questions. The first question is, what's good? Now, this comes from an ancient spiritual exercise called the Ignatian spiritual exercises. And St. Ignatius of Loyola, who I think was in the 12th century, and church historians and medievalists out there who are all raging in this moment because I just misdated St. Ignatius. I apologize. I would ask you just, what would Ignatius do?
Yeah.
I think he would forgive me.
Blame it on my head, not my heart. It's what we've heard recently.
That's a nice one. That's a nice one.
Not my heart.
So the Ignatian spiritual exercises, the first question is beautiful. It's, what are the sources of consolation in your life right now? I just abbreviate that to what's good or what's giving you life.
Yeah.
The second question, what's bad or what's not giving you life? The Ignatian version is, what are the sources of desolation in your life right now? The third question, how is your sense of purpose or meaning, or to use religious language, vocation or calling? How is that showing up in your life? What are you feeling called to do that helps the world and is good for you? And how is it showing up? Now, if you do that in a circle with at least two other people who are getting to know you, over time, it will become clear to you what your real sense of purpose or mission in life is. Couple of caveats. It's not about personal gain. It's not about selfish ambition. And it's not about ego. And at the same time, it is not entirely not about all of those.
Yeah.
Some of it is personal. There is a personal gain when you feel good on the inside. There is an ambition to spread joy. That's an ambition, you know. And the ego piece, my ego feels healthy and good and warm when I'm doing the thing that I'm led to do. Lots of us are doing stuff that we are not called to do. I had a friend in Belfast. I had not seen him for a while. He was an older man. He was kind of he was a different brand. He was, let's say, politically and theologically quite different to me. And I had drifted away from the same sort of community that he was a part of, and so I felt we were very different. One day, I'm sitting in an airport departure lounge, and I saw him walking toward me, and I thought, oh no, I really don't want to talk to this person because I think he's going to try and he'll either like admonish me for wandering off the path, or he's going to try and persuade me to come back, or it's going to be somehow awkward and embarrassing. And but he comes up to me, and like, it was such a beautiful lesson for me. I was like bracing myself for the judgment. At the time, I was presenting BBC radio programs, and he comes up to me and goes, Gareth, I tell all my friends when I hear you on the radio, I used to know him. And so immediately I start to melt, because it's good. He's what do you call it? Massaging my ego. I like that. I'm entirely imperfect. Please massage my ego more. And but I still felt somewhat awkward, and I made the conversation end quickly.
Yeah.
So I didn't have to spend more time with him. Then they call the flight. I get on the plane, and he's in the seat next to me. And as the flight takes off, this is not an exaggeration, he says to me, can I show you the most important thing in the world to me? And I thought, okay. And yeah, he takes out a big old leather-bound Bible. And I thought, oh no, here we go. And I still identify as a Christian, and I'm still a part of the Jesus movement. I'm just in a different place to him.
Yeah.
So he takes out his big leather-bound Bible, and he starts to open it, and I think he's going to read me a passage from Scripture and try to convert me on the plane. But no, inside the Bible is a photograph of his new granddaughter. And he shows me the photograph of his granddaughter and tells me her name and says, I've never been as happy in my life as I am now being a grandfather. And I realized the system that I was a part of with him tended to ascribe dignity and respect and a spotlight to men, almost exclusively men, who had a kind of an authoritative personality, who would stand up on a stage on a Sunday morning and tell it like it is. That was kind of the peak of the pyramid. A man who could tell it like it is. And it would, even better, if he was successful in business. Now, successful in business meant he was bringing in decent money. It didn't mean anything about what he was doing with his business, what he was making with his business, or how he treated his employees. That wasn't in the frame of reference. It was just, was he a solid alpha male, And he was telling me he'd never been as happy as when he went to this other part of his soul, grandfatherliness. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be amazing if that community learned to ascribe dignity and respect and a spotlight to the beautiful grandfathers, you know, among one of many different types of people, and the grandmothers.
Yeah.
And the everybody else is doing their thing that brought more life. And wouldn't it be better if instead of putting him on a stage where he's going to shout at us on a Sunday morning, let him run the Grandfathers Club? Let him say to the men who are becoming grandfathers, many of whom are feeling like their lives are over, many of whom are feeling like they've now retired. What am I going to do with my life? I'm not valuable anymore. Couldn't we turn grandfatherhood into the most exciting thing for those guys? You only do that if you're in conversation with people who are on a path toward emotional and spiritual maturity. And when people gather in groups of between 3 and 8, and they ask those 3 questions, what's good, what's bad, how's my purpose showing up, it presents itself over time. And then the last of the 4 questions that we ask when we gather in these circles, and I don't need to be there when these circles happen. No, but that's part of the beauty of this. You don't need to be an expert in anything other than your own questions, not your own answers, but just what's going on inside you. The 4th question, it's a really radical question, and it's a question that almost no one ever asks. And it's, having heard what we've heard, is there anybody here that wants to ask for something? Or is there anybody here that wants to offer something by way of help to anybody else in the circle? It can be as simple as, I need a babysitter on Thursday night and I can't afford it. Can someone here, maybe who's not a parent, can someone do that? It can be as profound as happened in our circle. Someone in our circle, one of their closest friends, died without warning, completely suddenly one day. And for quite some time, this member in our circle really needed to be helped with his grief. And just to say, for weeks, you know, I keep feeling it, I keep missing him, I keep feeling it. I just needed to be kind of tenderly cared for in his grief. There was a woman in our circle who had a really high-paying job that was deadening her soul. She really didn't like the job, but the money was good. She needed help to have the courage to quit the job. And she asked us, can you help me do I know I should do this, but I don't want to. We helped her do it, and then a few months later, when she was offered 3 new jobs, 2 of which were variations of the same bad, high-paying job, we helped her not give in and take that job, and she took a lower-paying job that she's been much happier in. Sometimes it's really existentially rich and metaphysical, like, I don't know if I believe in God anymore, and I need someone to go for a walk with me every Saturday for the rest of my life to help me work this through, to which, of course, we'd say, how about every Saturday for the next 6 weeks? Let's commit to that and see what happens.
Yeah.
Or, if you really want to upset the accepted order and the way oppressive structures in this society can really hurt people, how about, I can't afford to pay my rent. I would really like this circle to help me do this. And it's not a loan, it's a gift, and I'm going to pay it back in some way other than through money. You're not loaning me money. We're going to agree this community's going to pay my rent. And maybe maybe it shouldn't pay your rent. Maybe you should go and live with the people in this circle until you get on your feet. Or maybe the whole concept of getting on your feet. I don't know if I can say bullshit on your show, but I'm going to say bullshit. Maybe getting on your feet, other than the fact that that's offensive to people who are wheelchair users and for other reasons aren't able to stand, but metaphorically to get on your feet, get on your own 2 feet, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Maybe that concept is antithetical to what it is to be a human being born into community in which none of us is capable of meeting our own needs by ourselves. Maybe you were never supposed to get on your own 2 feet. Maybe we're all supposed to be helping each other stand or rise. We rise together, we fall together. I have needs that you don't have, so you can help me meet my needs. You have needs that I don't have, and I have lots of gifts that I can share with you. So the porch circles are not for experts on anything other than your own questions and your willingness to be humble enough to ask these questions of each other. And we have something in the pipeline that I think is going to really help deepen this in the city of Asheville and elsewhere, because You know, you don't have to be the kind of person who goes on a 10-day silent retreat in the desert to be into this. I like 10-day silent retreats in the desert, at least.
Vipassana? Is that
at least theoretically.
Yeah.
I haven't done Vipassana stuff yet, but I go on retreats, I lead retreats. A lot of people, that's not their thing.
Yeah.
Daily life is their thing, and it's everybody's thing, and we're all struggling. There is no one that's not carrying some kind of massive secret burden. If we would meet together once a week or even once a month for an hour for a cup of coffee and just start to ask, what's good, what's bad? What's your sense of purpose for the common good, and how can we help each other? And just experimented with that for 3 months. Like, I'd be willing to give a guarantee that your life would never be the same again.
I would not take the opposite on that bet. I would be on your team. It would be hard. It'd be hard.
Shoot, I need someone to bet against it.
It'd be hard pressed.
How are we going to make the money that's going to make me unhappy if you don't bet against me? I need to have so much money so that I can prove that money doesn't make you happy.
Isn't that a funny thing? That's one. So there's a couple. And I know that Sarah asked questions. I feel like I've been running this, but there's a couple things that have come up in the way that you've told stories and the stories that you've told that have like reminded me of moments. One of them is this idea that often we hear stories from people who have lived so far in the other direction. Yeah. Like the billionaire is the example that says money doesn't make you happy, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's the Kanye West lyric that says, money's not everything, but not having it is, and there's the middle ground in there. And do you need to become a billionaire to know that it's not worth it? And do you need to live on Skid Row to find Jesus and be in alignment, air quote, with whatever God you're working towards? And so like those things have always troubled me in the versions of stories that are often told, which are like very extreme. Yeah. And then all of a sudden very extreme in the other direction. And somehow there's right and there's no pride or honor in the middle of like finding it and not knowing and not pretending to know. So there's that. And then you consider saying like, what is the better story? And I get caught feeling Life of Pi was a book I read in like grade school, and I don't know if I read it the right way, but the way that the story stuck to me was, and are you familiar with the Life of Pi? Yeah. So like the way that the story stuck to me is that in the end, the journalist is like, yeah, but this just doesn't sound like it's a great or possible. And he goes, well, okay. And then in a matter of minutes tells the story with real humans, and it's terrible. And he goes, honestly, whatever story you like, whatever story is better for you. And I don't know if that's like actually how it goes, but that's how I heard it. And I'm like, oh shit, I'm gonna choose the better story. And that's how I've been trying to like live since reading Life of Pi as like a 14-year-old. And I don't know if that's actually the story, but that's what I heard. Does that resonate? Is that kind of where are you in somewhere of that?
Well, my memory of Life of Pi is that he's had that what's going on in there is. There's 250 pages of that book that paint this extraordinary imaginative story involving animals
and a raft.
And being on a raft. And then there's about 3 or 5 pages toward the end that imply that what really happened is this absolutely horrifying, traumatic experience. Yes. And that what he's done is he's made up this story to help himself cope with the pain of it.
And all throughout the book also are stories of the multiple religions that have affected his childhood.
Oh yeah, that's a beautiful piece. And yeah, I mean, Jan Martel, it's funny, he's one of those writers who, I know he's written other books, but this is the one, and I, I shouldn't close off the possibility he's going to write something like that. Yeah. Again, it's pretty rare to write something like Life of Pi in any lifetime. Yeah. My initial response to that I think it's something slightly different. I don't think we can know what's true. Of course, we can't know what's fully true, but that doesn't mean we can't know anything, right? And there's been one of the gifts of postmodernism is to help us question authoritative and oppressive power structures and to listen to voices that come from the margins, which causes me to even reflect on what I just said, because I said us, right? And like the us that I thought existed 20 years ago, when I was a graduate student in Belfast, is not the same us that I now understand to exist. And the us that I appreciate and welcome and learn from today is still smaller than the us I will know a year and, please God, 50 years from now. I never thought about the color of my skin. I never thought about my ethnicity in a kind of a global multicultural sense. I was living in Ireland, so what I thought about was my power status, as it were, regarding Northern Irish ethnicity, Protestant, Catholic, British, Irish, socioeconomic differences and things like that. So I've learned more about what us is. Us is far bigger than any one of us can imagine. And the more closer to, let's call it, the top of the pyramid of privilege and power we are, the more responsibility we have to be listening, actively listening to other voices and asking, what should I do with these resources I have? To the billionaire question, the richest person I know is one of the happiest, but he's happy in proportion to how much of his money he gives away. You know, he's in another part of the world, and you know, one of the things he did with the money that he came into, and it was a lot of money. It was more money than most of us will ever be able to imagine. He made a thing, and a big company bought it from him, and it was a good thing. It wasn't a missile. That's good. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't a chemical that poisons people. It was a helpful thing, and someone decided to give him and his partners a few $100 million for it. Yeah. And one of the things he did was he built an apartment block in the city where he lives. He and his wife built this apartment block. I think it has 40 apartments in it. And these are exclusively for women leaving abusive relationships to live in for free and be part of a community there that does these very same things that we're talking about. And his name is not on the building, and I'm being careful not to say more to identify him because he has no desire to be known for this. I think he's someone who understands happiness is actually proportionate to the service you're giving to the world. At the same time, there's some research that suggests that in the US, that in any society, there's a certain amount of money, any capitalist-dominated society, there's a certain amount of money after which you start to have breathing space, right? And happiness does increase when you have breathing space. The slight pushback I would have on that is it matters less the more deeply embedded in community you are, how much money is in your bank account. Yeah. The more deeply embedded you are in emotionally mature community that's willing to say, how much money you have is not a mark of your intrinsic value. How much money you have is not even necessarily a mark of how hard you have worked. How much money you have usually has something to do with who your parents were, how you got started in life, and certainly the race that is ascribed to you, the ethnicity that's ascribed to you in society, whether there were high levels of lead toxicity in the water that you were drinking when you were a child, these kinds of things that are structural injustices. So the only question, I don't care if you're a billionaire or you are housing insecure, the only question is, what are you doing with your resources, and who are the safe people who can help you with your lack? And there's a lot of us who should be doing more with the resources that we have, certainly to create the spaces in which folk who really, really lack something in our society are in relationship with those of us that hold these things that we can share. That's the only way to live an ethical life. And I'm going to be trying to do that for the rest of my life, and I'll be failing at it. I will be failing at it, but I won't be beating myself up over it because I will be in a porch circle that will continue to tell me, it's okay, Gareth, you're not perfect, but you don't need to be perfect. Or, you know what, mate, time to get up and get deeper into this thing again. Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering specifically with regards to the Asheville community. Yeah. what would you say to people that are listening? Again, people that we've identified have resources to listen to a podcast. What advice would you give to them to build a better community here?
Yeah. I love this city, and I've been very welcomed here, and I recognize that I'm, like many people in this city, I was not born and raised here. So I want to tread respectfully and thoughtfully with gratitude. The first thing I would do is pay attention to who's doing good works of service to the common good in this city. There's lots of them. Some formally through nonprofits and some individuals just doing quiet stuff. Pay attention to those people and go and ask them what you can do. I can tell you the things I notice that give me hope, and the things I notice that create curiosity. Hopeful things to me are anything that's free or reasonably priced or pay what you can afford. And there's a good number, particularly art type activities, storytelling nights, and there's loads of those in the city, meetup groups, so on and so forth, that kind of stuff. Notice whose voices are being heard at things like city council meetings, county commission. Go meet, if you're not already a county commissioner, and I have one or two friends who are, or a city councillor, go and meet one of your councillors or commissioners. This is something about, in Northern Ireland, we had these really deep long-term problems that we applied massive energy to helping to resolve. One of the differences between Northern Ireland and the US, I always see it as being two sides of the coin. Everybody in Northern Ireland knows at least a handful of politicians, partly because there's only 1.7 million people living in Northern Ireland, partly because we're such a highly politicized society that, eventually almost everyone considers running for office at some point, and partly because it's a European culture where we just do democracy differently there. There's no such thing as trying to purge voter registration rolls. We have automatic voter registration. We have proportional representation in a lot of our local elections, which is a form of rank order voting that's much fairer than a majoritarian system. And I always wondered when I came to the US, why do people in the US complain so much about politics and then not get involved? And there's this weird thing where I think the US has a monarchy and the UK is a republic. And that, another thing about people in the UK is everybody knows a member of the royal family in some way. They've all, oh yeah, I remember I met the Queen when I was 9, and they don't have her on a pedestal. I find it so unusual that not only do former presidents continue to keep the title, but senators and congresspeople as well keep the title of this office that they were elected to once. Former UK prime ministers don't get to continue to be called prime minister. They're entirely private citizens. And it's, when ex-presidents say I'm a private citizen now, that's not true. They're not private citizens. They don't
Service walking around every day.
Well, it's fair enough if they need security because there are actual threats. And that's one of the things that needs to be honored about people who run for political office is that there's a cost to it. For most politicians, it's not about violence, although for some, the threat of violence is real. And I don't, when people say I hate politicians and they're all liars, no, human beings are flawed. And there's a lot of people who get into politics, whatever their political hue, if that word translates here, they did it because they wanted to make the society better. We may disagree with what their ideologies were. And then the outcomes of their actions are how we evaluate whether or not they meant what they said or had integrity. I think in a city this size, it's a wonderfully compact city. You can get to know your councillors. You can get to know people at other levels of public office and go and ask them how you can help them achieve a vision for the common good, right? And the common good simply means the most good for everybody. It doesn't mean some good for some people and some bad for others. It means the most good for everybody. Another question would be, ask yourself, who are the people who've been here the longest? And what is happening to their communities? Because some of the people who've been here the longest are being gentrified out of their neighborhoods, are not able to afford to live in their own family homes anymore. And there is a racial disparity here. And if you have some power and some resources around this, I believe I have a responsibility to be asking myself, am I living with integrity here? I think for the U.S. generally, my one-stop plan to solve everything that's wrong with America right now, I can give you that. It's automatic voter registration across the country, annually, every year. The way it's done in the UK, you get a form mailed to your house, you fill it out, you mail it back in. You're automatically registered to vote. Political districts being apportioned by an entirely independent commission to avoid gerrymandering. Rank order voting, where you rank your candidates in order of preference. The outcomes of those kinds of elections, we do this in Northern Ireland, are that instead of a minority gets everything they want and most people get nothing that they want, what happens is sometimes even most people, but certainly many people get something they can live with, and some people get everything they wanted, and fewer people get nothing that they wanted. And then there has to be a process of profound self-examination as a society, and I'm a US citizen now, so I'm part of this, as a society, into the foundations of this nation and who this nation was founded on top of, and the legacy of how Indigenous people have been treated by the people who, quote-unquote, settled this land, and the legacy of the experience of the Africans who were brought here in chains. And until that's faced, I think everything else is kind of temporary skirmishing. And I speak this with a fair degree of nervousness about saying it. I'm not speaking it into the society. I'm part of this society. I've benefited from the society. And I came from a place that did it really badly for a long, long time, and has discovered lately that the only way for us to move forward as a society requires us to look back and have a real honest look. If I benefited from the mistreatment of other people, I need to ask myself, what am I supposed to do in response? I'm supposed to do something in response to that. And I would revitalize public transportation throughout the country and create a universal healthcare system and establish a high-speed rail system connecting the 50 largest urban areas in the country, and put reruns of the original Muppet Show on every Sunday night at about 9 o'clock, and invite everybody to watch delightful, benign chaos and imagine living like that. Other than that, I don't have any ideas.
So,
I love it.
so that is, in some ways, that combines two of our most common end of the conversation questions, and we're nearing that. We want to respect your time. But do you have anything to change? The two questions that almost always come up are, when you hear Asheville and community, what word association and triggers might come up for you? I feel like you might have just been there. And then the other is our magic wand question, which is, if we had a magic wand and could make any singular wish come true, could have been one of the many things that you have just proposed. But those two questions, you could change responses, add, or consider.
So what triggers me when I hear Asheville and community?
Yeah. What words? What thoughts? What
creativity, vibrancy, long history, new blood, diversity, rainbows, poetry, literature, painting, murals, the block off Biltmore, and any number of other places. Those things come up for me alongside Appalachia, alongside lots of people trying to learn how to share with each other. And for me, a place that has become home and that I feel very grateful to live in. And the magic wand question, I think it would be. I have friends who run something in East Belfast, which was a very socioeconomically deprived part of the city, and they're a community centre, and they have a mission statement that's really simple. It's something along the lines of to make East Belfast better for everybody who lives there and visits. That's not the same thing as to make it better for one industry at the expense of other people. Better for everybody who lives there and visits. And I would love to see all of us who have any kind of leadership role in this city to be paying some attention to that. I know lots of us are. But if we could move to making decisions based on what's best for everybody who lives here. There's some decisions I might want to undo, and there's some new decisions that haven't been made yet that I'd like to see happen. And there's a lot of things that are really great, that are working wonderfully.
And just because we haven't given it any air yet, one of the things that's coming up that I'm really excited about is the Movies and Meaning event. I think that this, based on what I've read on the internet, it seems to embody some of the conversations that you've highlighted as being meaningful. And Sarah and I can attest to, whether we call them porch sessions, we have dinner sessions that we intend to last hours, and we intend to have meaningful conversations during them. This event, this weekend-long event, seems to be a platform for these type of meaningful conversations. Is that right? Describe it a little.
Exactly right. I have an architect friend in Scotland who says the purpose of architecture is to help us live better. And you've seen bad architecture on that definition, and you've seen great architecture. Does it help us live better? I think that's the purpose of all art, all storytelling, actually, to help us live better. And that doesn't mean it can't deal with difficult subjects. In fact, it must deal with difficult subjects if it's going to help us live better. It just needs to be honest about those difficult subjects. So for me, because movies are the art form that has come to mean the most to me, and because often these days we don't get the chance to truly drink deeply at the well of a movie. Even if we go to see it in the first place, you got to, go through. It's a busier experience. It's a noisier experience. The lights tend to come on before the credits are over. You don't get to breathe it in. And then there's no sort of interpretive mechanism to help us really make sense of what we just saw. Ask our questions, feel connected to other people who felt the same way. So we've done this festival. This is the 5th time we've done it, 2nd time in Asheville. And we do 2 or 3 things at it. One, we show beautiful films in a beautiful environment. Diana Wortham Theatre and the Fine Arts Theatre, both downtown. And we give those films the opportunity to breathe. So we keep the lights off until the end credits have finished, and we invite people to stay quiet until they're over. We show 3 kinds of films. One is new films that you haven't seen yet. Another is iconic films that deserve to be seen again. And then we often show what we call overlooked films, a recent movie that we feel like, that deserves another chance. The second thing we do is we pair the films with conversations and activities that will deepen the meaning of the film. This year we have a really beloved, distinguished author called Kathleen Norris and Buddy Wakefield, who, as you know, because it's how we got connected, 3-time World Poetry Slam champion,
incredible, yeah.
Who has made a film, actually. He's made a short film based on one of his poems. And Mickey Scott Bay Jones, who we already talked about, who does Enneagram work and has the title The Justice Doula. She's trying to midwife justice in the world. And me, and also David Lamont, who's a beloved singer-songwriter here locally and a great friend of ours. So we do stuff that's more than just a typical question and answer session. It's more about what's going on in you and how would you like to change as a result of seeing this film. We have a lot of fun with it as well. And the third thing is we invite people to connect with each other. Whether you've come as a group or you want to meet other people who are there, there's meal times and opportunities for people to hang out and get to know other people who feel the same way about some things, and maybe some new friendships can begin. And the day before the festival, we have a workshop called Rewriting Your Life, which is a deeper dive on many of the things we've talked about this afternoon, to think about what's the story you're telling, is it true and is it helpful? If it's not, how can we help find a truer version and a more helpful version? One of the things we're really committed to is if you're one of the privileged people like me who has the money to attend an event like this, we invite you to pay to register to come to the event. We even invite you to pay more than the registration fee if you can. And if you are in financial need and can't afford the registration fee, you can come as well with no questions asked and no embarrassment. All you need to do is email us and tell us what you can afford. Because I think we're past the point of thinking that a beautiful experience of community should have a price tag on it that only those who can afford it can get in. We find, I do this with my own books. When I'm speaking at an event and I have books for sale, I'll let people know what the cover price is and tell them it'd be really great if you can pay that. And if you can't afford that, we take less than that. And if you can't afford that, you can have a book for free. And if you can afford more than the cover price to help me share this book with other people, I invite you to pay more. And I will say, in 6 years of doing that, people are always generous. People are always contributing more to help us give it away or to sell it for less. And there's lovely experiences where people say, look, I can't afford $16.99, but I might be able to afford 14 or 8 or nothing. It builds relationship and community. Generosity feeds on generosity. I have experienced so much generosity at the hands of this culture here in the US. This part is for those of you who think I'm an asshole because all those things I said about politics earlier. I am really grateful for the generosity I've experienced in this culture. This culture has helped me waken up to my own gifts in ways that Irish culture has a different way of doing things. Now, there are gifts in Irish culture too, but American generosity, American belief that we can do good things with our lives that help other people, that's beautiful, and it's a rare gift. And when people put that generosity out into the world, it's not like people say this like it's a woo-woo mystical thing, and maybe there is a woo-woo mystical part to it. I just think it's a practical reality. When someone does something generous and you see them doing that, it's an evolutionary reality that you're going to imitate what they do. So register for Movies and Meaning at moviesandmeaning.com if you can, and if you're in financial need, just contact us through the website. We'd much rather have you there and you not pay us or pay us less than have you miss this experience.
Praise hands. Praise hands.
But we can't guarantee the event's going to be any good. But
yeah.
Remind us again the dates of the event. Just for
so the workshop's on the 20th of February, Thursday night, and Friday daytime, and the festival is Friday night through Sunday lunchtime, the 21st to the 23rd of February.
Lovely. And we will have links to all of that for sure in the show notes and in the episode page. Do you have any links or where can people find you specifically, projects on the internet?
theporchmagazine.com and garethhiggins.net. And I also take groups of people to Ireland to learn about peace building in the summers. If you go to irelandretreats.net, I think it's .net.
We'll have the appropriate link and perhaps even an image of the little flyer that we're stealing from Gareth's house, which is lovely and two-sided. And it was such a deep privilege to be here today, that you welcomed us into your home, that you responded to a wild hair email that came late at night after even hearing that this was happening in our backyard, front yard, neighborhood. We're honored and excited for you, and I just can't wait to participate more actively in the community and just get you as out, perhaps, maybe not dinner yet, but coffee as a version of a mentor for us.
Well, it's really, you look like you were going to say something.
No.
Okay. I mean, it's really kind of you to say that, and you're so welcome. I honestly don't think there's anything better than human connection, and so it's a joy for me too. And thank you for what you're doing, and welcome again to this city.
Thank you so much.
As I feel grateful to this city for welcoming me.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, was episode 42 with Gareth Higgins. How are you feeling? What's good? What's bad? How are you in alignment with your purpose right now? Oh my goodness. People, I feel aligned.
Yeah. I feel like I could listen to this episode. I feel like I should listen to this episode.
Hard word. We don't like to use the word should, but
like,
this is it.
But like, it could be an episode that I come back to and listen to multiple times a year to kind of get that inspiration and feeling. Like, we left that conversation like I don't know if I want to say zenned out, but I was just like really deep in thought and so many questions. And
I think grounded. I felt really grounded, right? I felt really safe. I felt really, I don't know. I felt comfortable. I felt like there was reason to be A, joyful, but B, optimistic. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. Please, we look forward to your engagement and enthusiasm one way or another with the conversation specifically from this episode. Please participate either by liking and reviewing the podcast, or by commenting on Instagram posts, or by, you can watch this on YouTube and leave comments there. But like, please let us know how this episode sounded and resounded with you. Our email list clearly is going to be a great place to do that as well. But we look forward to hearing, because this is a little different. It's less business, though he has plenty of businesses. This was a little deviation from what is normal, and we'd love to hear how it sounded.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are looking for ways to connect with us, the easiest way to do that is just go to makingitinashville.com/subscribe. And we have lots of different ways that you can connect there. And furthermore, there were so many interesting people that we talked about, so many interesting books and concepts and events that we mentioned throughout this episode. So our movies. So we've listed all of those there in the show notes page, which is makingitinashville.com/042. That way you can just have easy access to everything that we talked about, and you can connect with Gareth there as well.
Perfect. We also just want to take a quick moment to, again, double underline the idea of likes and reviews. They are wildly helpful. They help these stories get shared more broadly when people happen upon Apple Podcasts, and they put in a couple words. The more likes and more reviews, the more likely these stories from Gareth and our other guests get shared. So thank you in advance for taking the time to like and review.
And we want to take a moment to remind you about some of our upcoming events here at Making It in Asheville. We have our next Monday Maker Mixer coming up at the end of February. So these are social networking events. We say that they are networking events that don't suck. We try to connect like-minded entrepreneurs, artists, etc. here in Asheville. So to learn more about that, you can go to makingitinashville.com/events. And secondly, we also have an upcoming podcast workshop at the end of February. It is sold out, but if you are interested in taking this workshop, it's a workshop designed for beginners to launch their podcast more easily and quickly. If you are interested, please join the waitlist. Again, just go to makingitinashville.com/events, click on the Beginners Podcasting Workshop, and you can join the waitlist there. That will help us know if there is interest and demand to offer another workshop later on in the year.
Exactly. Thank you, Sarah. One last shout out to our only sponsor so far, which is our own marketing agency. We call it Making It Creative. Like Gareth, we are all in on the idea that stories have the potential to change the world and a entrepreneur's world. And so we work with businesses to think about what stories they're telling, how best to tell them in ways that end up driving sales. So we're thinking about revenue first and foremost. Always, if you're interested in reading a bit more about that or seeing what's up, just visit makingitcreative.com.
And finally, if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the podcast, we are always looking for new guests to interview in upcoming seasons. You can nominate them at makingitinasheville.com/podcast. And of course, try to come to one of our Monday Mixer events. Come out and meet us. Tell us what you're up to. We'd love to learn more about you.
Perfect. Yeah, we're solid on season 1, or I'm sorry, season 3. But
I hope we're
quarter
solid on
1,
season 1.
the season of 2020, first season out in 2020. But we're thinking about honestly the next 6 months and getting way out in front of recording so that we can do really interesting and hopefully more meaningful and powerful things like put out really great additional content via YouTube or on Instagram or on our email list with some of the behind-the-scenes stories that we're really leaning into telling. All of those things are only possible when we get way out in front on recording. It's a lesson that we've learned over the last 42 episodes. So we look forward to hearing from you or about a friend who you think would be a really good fit. Thank you in advance for that. Holy moly. Sarah, this is 42 episodes. Quick math means that we're 10 weeks away from effectively when we started. Yep. It's not, I don't think the math is exactly right because we did launch the first 3 at once, I think. We'll have to go back, but oh my goodness.
Yeah, we're away from about a year's worth of podcasting, which means it's going to be our 1-year anniversary, which, by the way, we're thinking up something really cool to celebrate. So be on the lookout for that event.
Not on the screen, which we use to help kind of guide what we're saying here. But that is a really good point. We're in a conversations about what kind of a meaningful 1-year birthday party we might be able to throw for this podcast. So if you're interested in hearing about that, you can rest assured that the first people that are going to hear about the details are people on our email list. If that's the reason why you join our email list, hip, hip, hooray. We look forward to partying with you in a few short months. Sarah, 42 episodes in. High five. We'll see you next week.